I believe the universe itself is our primary evidence. Its existence, its intricate laws, its fine-tuning for life, these are not accidents. They point to a transcendent, intelligent cause. As Aquinas argued, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it must have a cause, and that cause is what we call God.
First, the first cause argument. If everything needs a cause, what caused God? You simply define God as uncaused, which is special pleading. I can apply the same logic to the universe. Perhaps the quantum vacuum or a multiverse is the uncaused brute fact. Second, the fine-tuning argument. It's a classic example of observational selection bias. We find ourselves in a universe that can support us precisely because we are here to observe it. In a universe with different constants, no one would be around to call it untuned. It's not proof of a tuner.
You dismiss the fine-tuning too easily. The probability of all these constants aligning by chance is astronomically low. It strongly suggests design. Furthermore, you speak of a multiverse, but that is an untestable, metaphysical concept itself, a science of the gaps. Isn't it more rational to posit one necessary, intelligent mind than an infinite number of unobservable universes? And this leads to the moral argument. Our innate sense of good and evil, of justice and compassion, where does it come from? If we are merely matter in motion, the product of blind evolution, then morality is just a useful evolutionary illusion. But we know that some things are objectively wrong. This moral law requires a moral lawgiver.
I disagree profoundly. Morality emerges perfectly well from our social nature and evolutionary history. Empathy, reciprocity, and cooperation are highly adaptive traits for social species. We don't need a divine commander to explain why hurting others is detrimental to the group's survival. In fact, looking at the horrors justified by religious texts, genocide, slavery, misogyny, I'd argue we've progressed morally in spite of many religious doctrines, not because of them. Our modern, secular understanding of human rights is far more robust and universal than any morality derived from a specific holy book.
You're cherry-picking the worst human interpretations of religion, which is a fallacy. The core message of most major faiths is love, charity, and self-transcendence. And this points to another evidence: religious experience. Billions of people, across all cultures and eras, have reported direct, personal encounters with the divine. This pervasive, profound sense of a sacred reality cannot be dismissed as mere hallucination or psychological defect. It is a consistent data point pointing toward a reality that interacts with the human heart and mind.
Consistency across cultures isn't proof of an external object, it's proof of a common human neurology. The human brain is a pattern-seeking, agency-detecting machine. It's what kept us safe on the savannah. Assuming a rustle in the grass was a predator was a good survival strategy. It's no surprise that this same hardware, contemplating the vastness of the cosmos and the mystery of death, generates experiences of gods, spirits, and cosmic consciousness. We can trigger these experiences with magnetic fields, psychoactive drugs, or meditation. They tell us about the brain, not about a separate divine realm.
That is a reductionist view that explains away the experience, but fails to explain its content and transformative power. What of the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, for example? The empty tomb, the post-mortem appearances, the radical transformation of the disciples? These are events that changed the world.
The historical evidence for the resurrection is based on documents written decades after the fact by devoted followers, full of contradictions and theological agendas. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A man rising from the dead is the most extraordinary claim possible. The far more likely explanation is a combination of legend, myth-making, and perhaps visionary experiences by grief-stricken followers. People die for what they believe is true all the time. That doesn't make their belief factual.
So, you see no room for God? You look at the cosmos, from the quantum foam to the galactic clusters, at the beauty of a sunset, the miracle of consciousness, the power of self-sacrificial love, and you conclude, it's all physics and chemistry? That seems like a willful closing of the eyes to the deeper meaning that is staring us in the face. God is not a God of the gaps to be pushed back by science, but the fundamental ground of all being, the reason there is something rather than nothing.
And I see that as a beautiful, poetic, but ultimately unsubstantiated claim. I look at the same universe and see a natural, self-contained system of stunning complexity, one we are only beginning to understand. To insert a God hypothesis doesn't actually explain anything, it just adds an unnecessary layer of complexity. Who designed the designer? Why is the problem of evil and gratuitous suffering so pervasive if an omnipotent, omnibenevolent being is in charge? I find the natural world, with all its chaos and splendor, to be more awe-inspiring and humbling when I accept it for what it is, rather than projecting a parental figure onto it. My stance isn't a lack of wonder, it's a wonder directed at the real, knowable universe. Let's press on the point of morality. You claim God is the objective foundation for good. But this leads us straight to the Euthyphro dilemma: is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? If the first is true, then morality is arbitrary. God could command torture and it would be good. If the second is true, then goodness exists independently of God, and we don't need him to have an objective standard. Which is it?
That is a false dichotomy. God's nature is goodness. He does not arbitrarily command good like a dictator. He is the very source and embodiment of love, justice, and truth. His commands are revelations of his own eternal and perfect character. So, God commands it because it is good, and it is good because it flows from his essential nature.
That doesn't solve the problem, it just restates it. We are still left with the fact that your holy texts depict God commanding things that violate this very perfect character you speak of, the extermination of the Canaanites, the condoning of slavery. If we use our own innate, evolved moral sense, which you earlier dismissed, we can see that these acts are barbaric. It seems you are forced to either defend genocide or admit that your moral standard comes from a human, fallible interpretation of right and wrong, not from a perfectly good God.
You are judging an infinite, eternal God with a finite, temporal human understanding. God, as the author of life and the ultimate judge of all nations, has rights and a perspective we cannot fully grasp. What appears to us as a harsh command must be seen in its broader historical and spiritual context, as an act of divine justice against profound evil and a means of preserving a lineage through which salvation would come to the world. It is not for us to sit in judgment of the judge of all the earth.
And that, to me, is the ultimate abdication of moral responsibility. God's ways are mysterious is not an answer, it's a conversation ender. It can be used to justify any atrocity. Now, let's move to the most potent argument against your benevolent, all-powerful God, the problem of suffering. If God is all-powerful, he can prevent suffering. If he is all good, he would want to prevent suffering. Yet, profound, gratuitous suffering exists. Children die of bone cancer. Tsunamis wipe out the innocent. Therefore, God is either not all-powerful, or not all good, or he does not exist. How can you reconcile the reality of a child's agonizing death with an all-loving God?
This is the greatest challenge to faith, and I do not claim to have a complete answer. But we must consider the necessity of free will. A world without the potential for suffering, caused by our own free choices, would be a world of puppets, not persons. The greater good of genuine love and moral choice requires the risk of evil and suffering.
Free will explains moral evil, the evil humans do to each other. It does not explain natural evil, the bone cancer, the tsunamis. What free will is exercised by a tectonic plate? Why would a good God create a world with laws of nature that inevitably cause such random, indiscriminate agony? Is the free will of a malaria parasite more valuable than the life of a child? This seems like a monstrously inefficient or indifferent system for soul-making.
I cannot pretend to know the specific reason for every instance of suffering. But I trust that a God who himself entered into this world of suffering, in the person of Christ, and subjected himself to torture and a painful death, is not a distant, indifferent deity. He shares in our suffering. Furthermore, what we perceive as pointless evil may, in a grand, cosmic context beyond our sight, serve a purpose we cannot fathom, perhaps to forge virtues like courage, compassion, and resilience that could not exist in a perfectly sterile paradise.
That trust seems, to me, like a cruel hope placed in a silent partner. To say that the agonizing death of a child forges virtue in others is to use that child as a mere means to an end, which is itself a profound moral evil. And the idea of a cosmic context is, again, unfalsifiable. It's a justification that could be used to explain anything, making it explain nothing. The simplest, most honest conclusion is that the universe operates according to blind, natural forces, indifferent to our concepts of good and evil. Suffering is not a puzzle to be solved by theology, it is a fact of existence to be mitigated by compassion and human effort. We are alone, and the responsibility for creating meaning and morality is ours, and ours alone. Isn't that a more noble, if terrifying, prospect?
It is a noble prospect only if nobility itself has any objective meaning, which on your view, it cannot. Without God, our compassion is just a complex biochemical reaction, no more morally significant than a lion sparing a cub. You speak of responsibility, but to whom? To what? Without a transcendent standard, it's merely a subjective preference. I find the world, with all its horror, to be ultimately meaningful and open to healing and redemption, because I believe in a God who promises to wipe away every tear. You find it ultimately meaningless, a brief flicker of consciousness in an uncaring void. That is not nobility, it is despair dressed in courage.